What happens when a man who has everything decides he wants more? Richard Lopez, a billionaire titan of industry, walked into his divorce hearing with a predator's smile. On his arm wasn't his wife of 15 years, the mother of his children, but his stunning young mistress, June. He thought he had the perfect plan to leave his wife Alaia with nothing, not even her dignity. He was about to publicly accuse her of infidelity and demand a paternity test for their 2 children. But in the cold, quiet halls of justice, a secret was waiting. A secret locked in an envelope on the judge's desk. Richard came expecting a victory, but he was walking into a perfectly laid trap, and the truth encoded in DNA was about to detonate his entire world. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Mateo County Superior Court was thick with the scent of old paper and simmering animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all polished wood and muted beige walls designed to leach the passion out of human conflict. But today it failed spectacularly. The room buzzed with a palpable energy, a cocktail of anticipation and schadenfreude that clung to the tailored suits of the lawyers and the hushed whispers of the gallery. At the center of it all sat Richard Lopez. He wasn't just a man. He was an institution in Silicon Valley. The founder and CEO of Ether Dynamics, a company that had revolutionized data storage. Richard was a darling of the tech world and a fixture in society magazines. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that immense wealth and power often bestow. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, a whisper of charcoal gray that probably cost more than the court stenographer's car. And on his face a smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of supreme confidence of a game already won. Beside him, in the space legally reserved for his counsel, sat June Rossi. Her presence was the ultimate act of psychological warfare. She was 28, with hair the color of liquid night and eyes that seemed to drink in the light. Her dress was a sheath of crimson that defied the somber environment, a bold declaration of victory. She occasionally placed a perfectly manicured hand on Richard's arm, a gesture of ownership. She was the mistress, the homewrecker, and she wore the title like a crown. Across the aisle sat Alaia Lopez. If Richard and June were a raging fire, Alaia was a frozen lake. She sat with a posture so straight it seemed carved from ice. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant chignon. She wore a modest navy blue dress, the kind that signals quiet dignity, not surrender. There were no tears. Her face was a mask of placid neutrality. Her gaze fixed not on her husband or his lover, but on the formidable woman sitting elevated before them, Judge Eleanor Vance. To the outside world, this was a tragic but familiar story. The brilliant aging billionaire discarding his loyal, first-edition wife for a newer model. The media had already painted the picture. Alaia Lopez, the former art historian who had given up a promising career to raise a family and support her husband's meteoric rise, was now being cast aside. It was a cliché, and Richard was counting on that. Clichés were predictable. He controlled predictable. But Alaia knew something no one else in that room knew. She knew that the real story wasn't a cliché. It was a horror film. And she was the final girl. Her mind drifted back a year to the last time she had felt truly secure. It was the annual Beacon of Innovation Gala. She remembered the feel of the cool silk of her gown, the weight of the diamond necklace Richard had gifted her, the constellation, he'd called it. He had been incandescent that night, charming everyone, his arm securely around her waist. In his speech, accepting another award, he'd called her his North Star. None of this, he'd said, sweeping his arm across the glittering ballroom, would be possible without the smartest, most beautiful, and most patient woman in the world, my wife Alaia. The room had erupted in applause. She had blushed, feeling the genuine warmth of his words, or what she'd believed was warmth. Looking back now, she realized it had been performance. Richard was the CEO of his own life, and everyone else was just an employee playing a part. The first crack in the facade had appeared 3 months later. It was small, almost insignificant. A scent on his shirt collar when he came home late from a board dinner. It was a perfume she didn't recognize, a heavy, musky floral. jasmine and something darker. She had asked him about it, and he'd laughed it off. Must have been Susan from marketing. You know how she practically bathes in that stuff. But a week later, a charge appeared on their joint Amex statement. La Perla, $2,740. He didn't buy her lingerie from La Perla. He knew she found it impractical. When she questioned him, his casual explanation was ready. A gift for my sister's birthday, darling. Forgot to tell you. His sister's birthday was 6 months away. The small cracks spider-webbed, branching out into undeniable fissures. Late nights became more frequent. Business trips extended without notice. He grew distant, his phone guarded like a state secret, its screen angled away from her whenever she entered a room. The easy intimacy they had shared for 15 years evaporated, replaced by a polite, formal chill. He still played the part of the family man on weekends, taking their children 12-year-old Leo and 8-year-old Chloe to the park, but his eyes were elsewhere. He was a ghost in their sprawling Atherton mansion. Alaia wasn't a fool. She had a master's degree in art history from Yale, specializing in detecting forgeries. She knew how to look for inconsistencies, for the brushstroke that didn't belong, for the pigment that was anachronistic. And her husband's life had become a poorly executed fake. The pain was a physical thing, a constant dull ache in her chest. This was the man she had built a life with, the father of her children. The nights were the worst, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the empty space beside her a cold, gaping wound. She cried until she had no tears, left her grief raw and suffocating. Then one rain-swept Tuesday, grief turned to ice-cold clarity. She had been helping Chloe with a school project when an email notification flashed on the family iPad, which was still logged into Richard's account. The subject line was Project Nightingale, Asset Realignment. The sender was Marcus Thorne, Richard's notoriously ruthless corporate lawyer. Curiosity warred with her sense of privacy. She clicked. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a corporate project. It was a detailed plan, a meticulously crafted strategy for divorce. It outlined the creation of offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, the transferring of marital assets into untraceable accounts, and a strategy to devalue his stock options on paper. Project Nightingale was a blueprint for how to leave his wife with the bare minimum the law would allow, protecting the vast majority of his $500 million fortune. But it was the last paragraph that made her gasp, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Phase 4. Character leverage. To ensure a favorable custody arrangement and to counter any claims of spousal support based on lifestyle, we will contest paternity of the children. This will immediately place on the defensive, portray her as untrustworthy and morally compromised, and shift the narrative in our favor. We will leak this to our media contacts at the appropriate moment. They were going to say Leo and Chloe weren't his, her children, her babies. The man she had loved, the man who had tucked their children into bed and read them stories, was planning to disown them in a court of law as a financial strategy. He was going to brand her an adulteress and bastardize his own son and daughter to save money. In that moment, something inside Alaia shifted. The heartbroken wife died, and a warrior was born. The pain in her chest didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something hard and sharp rage. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness. He had mistaken her devotion for stupidity. He was about to find out how wrong he was. She closed the email, her mind racing. She took a screenshot with a trembling hand, airdropped it to her own phone, and then deleted the original email from the trash folder on the iPad. He would never know she had seen it. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the device. The tear-streaked, betrayed woman was gone. In her place was a stranger with cold, determined eyes. Richard had started a war. He just didn't realize she was already 2 steps ahead of him, armed with his own battle plan. And she had a weapon he could never have anticipated: the truth. The day after discovering Project Nightingale, Alaia Lopez made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named David Chen. They had known each other since college. While Alaia pursued art history, David had gone to Stanford Law. He was now a partner at a boutique family law firm in San Francisco known for his sharp intellect and his quiet bulldog tenacity. He wasn't a media hound like Richard's lawyer Marcus Thorne. He was a strategist who won his cases in the discovery phase, not in the headlines. They met in a discreet coffee shop in Noe Valley, far from the prying eyes of the Silicon Valley elite. Alaia laid it all out, the suspicions, the coldness, the email. She slid her phone across the table, showing him the screenshot of the battle plan. David read it, his expression hardening with each line. When he got to the part about contesting paternity, he looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "The absolute arrogance," he whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't just divorce, Alaia. This is scorched earth. He's planning to psychologically annihilate you and use your children as ammunition. This document, this is malpractice. This is malicious prosecution waiting to happen." "I know," Alaia said, her voice steady. "He thinks I'll crumble. He's expecting tears and hysterics. He's not expecting a fight." "So what do you want to do?" David asked, leaning forward. "We can file first. We can use this email to show intent, get a judge to freeze his assets." "No," Alaia said, cutting him off. Her voice was firm. "That's what he'd expect. He'd counter, he'd claim the email was a fabrication, he'd bog us down in motions for years. His lawyer is a shark. We can't meet him on his own terms. We have to let him walk into his own trap." David looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Tell me what you're thinking." "He wants to contest paternity," Alaia said, a chill in her tone. "He wants to stand up in court and accuse me of being an unfaithful wife and a liar. He wants to demand a DNA test." She paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. "So we're going to give it to him. But we're going to have the results before he even asks the question." David's eyebrows shot up. "A private DNA test. Without a court order. Alaia, the chain of custody would be difficult to establish. He could claim we tampered with the samples." "We won't use it as evidence, David," she explained, her plan taking shape even as she spoke. "We will use it as knowledge. Knowledge is power. We'll know the answer. We'll let him make his vile accusation in open court. We'll let him humiliate me. We'll let the judge order the official test. And when the results come back, his own motion will be the instrument of his destruction. He won't just be proven wrong. He'll be exposed as a malicious liar and a fraud in front of the entire world. His character, the very thing he's trying to attack, will be irrevocably destroyed by his own hand." A slow smile spread across David Chen's face. "Alaia Lopez, you're more ruthless than he is." "He taught me," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "He just doesn't know what a good student I am." As the second phone call was to a discreet private investigation firm. The man she hired was a former SFPD detective named Frank Peterson, a gruff, no-nonsense man in his late 50s. She didn't need him to prove the affair. Richard's own sloppiness had already done that. She needed him for two things: to document the scale of the infidelity for the court and to obtain the crucial DNA sample. "I need a sample of my husband's DNA," she told Frank in his cluttered, anonymous office. "A hair, a used coffee cup, anything. But it has to be obtained cleanly, and he can never know." Frank nodded, unfazed. "The office is easiest. People shed DNA everywhere. We'll get it." While Frank went to work, Alaia began her own quiet campaign. She played the part of the oblivious, slightly sad wife perfectly. She continued to manage the household, attend school functions for Leo and Chloe, and host the occasional dinner party. She smiled politely at Richard during the rare moments they were together, a serene mask hiding the raging fire beneath. He mistook her calm for resignation, her quietness for defeat. His arrogance was her greatest ally. Frank delivered 2 weeks later. His team had tailed Richard and June to a luxury hotel in Carmel for a weekend conference. He provided Alaia with a folder containing dozens of high-resolution photos, Richard and June kissing by the pool, holding hands at dinner, entering their hotel room together. It was clinical, irrefutable proof. But the most important thing he delivered was a small evidence bag. Inside was a single disposable coffee cup from Starbucks. "He tossed it in a public can on his way into the office this morning," Frank said. "It's all yours." The next step was the most painful. She had to get samples from her own children. She waited until they were asleep. She crept into Leo's room first, the moonlight streaming through his window illuminating the face of the boy who had his father's eyes. Her heart ached. This felt like a betrayal, but she knew it was a necessary shield to protect him from a far greater one. With a tiny pair of sterile scissors, she snipped a small, unnoticeable lock of his hair from the nape of his neck. She did the same to Chloe, her daughter's soft blonde hair like silk between her fingers. She sealed them in separate bags. She used a sterile cheek swab on herself, then packaged all 3 samples, the coffee cup, the 2 locks of hair, and her own swab, and sent them via a medical courier to a highly reputable DNA lab in another state, one that specialized in discreet, legally defensible testing. The order form was filed under David Chen's name, not hers. While she waited for the results, Richard made his move. He sat her down in their cavernous living room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on a point on the far wall. "Alaia, this isn't working," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've grown apart. I think it's time we went our separate ways. I've spoken to my lawyer, and he'll be in touch with yours." Alaia had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply nodded. "I see." Her lack of reaction seemed to annoy him. He was expecting a scene. "I'll be generous, of course," he said, the lie tasting like ash in her own mouth. "I want what's best for the children." "Of course," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of weary acceptance. He finally looked at her, a flicker of something, was it pity or contempt in his eyes. "I'll be moving out tomorrow. I've taken a penthouse in the city. My assistant will arrange to have my things packed." "Fine," she said. He stood up, clearly unnerved by her composure. This wasn't going according to his script. He walked out of the room without another word. The next day, he was gone. 2 days later, David Chen received the official divorce filing from Marcus Thorne. And it was exactly as the email had promised. Richard was petitioning for sole custody, citing Alaia's instability, and there on page 4 was the bombshell clause. And furthermore, the petitioner has grave reason to believe he is not the biological father of the 2 children born during the marriage, and will be motioning the court to compel a paternity test to resolve this matter. The news, when it was inevitably leaked to the press, was a Category 5 hurricane. The headlines were brutal. Tech mogul's divorce. Shocker wife's secret betrayal and Hayes paternity bombshell, who's the father? Alaia became a pariah overnight. Mothers at her children's private school would turn their backs when she approached. She was photographed by paparazzi looking haggard on her way to the grocery store. Online, the trolls were merciless, calling her a gold digger, a liar, an adulteress who had trapped a great man. Richard and June, meanwhile, were photographed looking somber and united, a portrait of 2 people bravely facing a devastating betrayal. Through it all, Alaia remained silent. She deactivated her social media. She instructed Leo and Chloe's school to allow no media on the premises. She became a recluse in her own home, her only contact with the outside world being David Chen. "The pressure is immense, Alaia," he told her over the phone. "They're painting a narrative, and right now, we're letting them." "Let them," Alaia replied, her voice calm. "Let them build the pedestal as high as they want. It will make the fall that much more spectacular." The day before the first court hearing, a secure encrypted email arrived from the DNA lab. David Chen opened it in his office with Alaia on a video call. It was a simple PDF document, a series of charts and numbers. But at the bottom was a summary. Match probability. Richard Hayes and Leo Hayes. 99.9998%. Match probability. Richard Hayes and Chloe Hayes. 99.99999%. Alaia closed her eyes, a single hot tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of vindication. "We have it," David said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "The silver bullet." "Good," Alaia said, opening her eyes. They were clear and cold as a winter sky. Now we just let him load the gun and point it at his own head. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare orchestrated by Richard and his attorney, Marcus Thorne. Thorne, a man with a reptilian smile and a reputation for salting the earth of his legal adversaries, launched a full-scale media assault. Carefully selected sources close to the couple began leaking stories to gossip columns and tech blogs. One story suggested Alaia had been having a long-term affair with a bohemian art dealer from her past. Another hinted at her erratic behavior and lavish, irresponsible spending. They were building a case in the court of public opinion, meticulously crafting an image of Alaia as an unstable, untrustworthy woman, perfectly capable of deceiving her husband for 15 years. The narrative was simple and effective. Richard Lopez, the brilliant visionary, had been the victim of the ultimate betrayal. Alaia weathered the storm from within the walls of the Atherton mansion. She felt like a prisoner, the whispers and headlines forming invisible bars around her. The hardest part was shielding the children. Leo, at 12, was old enough to sense the tension. He saw the paparazzi lurking at the end of their long driveway and asked questions Alaia couldn't answer. "Mom, why are those people always taking pictures? Why is Dad living somewhere else?" He'd asked one evening, his voice small. Alaia had pulled him close, her heart constricting. "Daddy and I are having some grown-up disagreements, sweetie. But we both love you and Chloe more than anything in the world. That will never ever change." It was a half-truth, but it was the only one she could give. Meanwhile, David Chen was playing a very different game. While Marcus Thorne was busy talking to reporters, David was buried in paperwork, filing motion after motion for financial discovery. He requested every bank statement, every email, every contract related to Richard's labyrinthine corporate structure. Thorne's office responded with a deluge of paper, thousands of pages of irrelevant documents, a classic hide the needle in a haystack tactic. But David had hired a team of forensic accountants, telling them to look for the specific shell corporations mentioned in the Project Nightingale email, Nightingale Holdings Limited, Blue Heron Investments Inc., and a dozen others. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone," David told Alaia during one of their nightly calls. "Men like Richard believe rules are for other people. They get sloppy. He's moved millions, but he's left a trail. We just have to find it." The pre-trial hearing was a formality, but a crucial one. It was where Richard's team would formally introduce their motion to compel the paternity test. They met in Judge Vance's chambers, a room that felt more like a library lined with leather-bound legal books. Richard was there, exuding a somber confidence. Marcus Thorne did all the talking, his voice smooth and reasonable as he laid out their unfortunate but necessary request. "Your Honor," Thorne began, "my client did not come to this decision lightly. It is with a heavy heart that he must confront the possibility of a profound deception. For the sake of his own peace of mind and for the future well-being and clarity of the children, we believe a paternity test is the only way to move forward with the foundation of truth." Judge Vance, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, listened without expression. She looked over at David and Alaia. "Mr. Chen, your response." David stood. "Your Honor, my client finds this accusation to be baseless, insulting, and deeply malicious. It is a transparent attempt to harm her reputation and gain leverage in these proceedings. It is character assassination, plain and simple." Alaia sat motionless, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the judge. She played her part to perfection, radiating the quiet devastation of a falsely accused woman. Thorne smirked. "If the accusation is baseless, then your client should have no objection to a simple test to clear her name. Her resistance only fuels my client's concerns." It was the moment of the pivot. David had coached her for this. He paused as if considering his options. My client is not resistant to the truth, Mr. Thorne. She is disgusted by the lie. However, he turned back to the judge. To put an end to this vile and public speculation, and to protect her children from further uncertainty, she will consent. Let the court order the test. Let's have the truth once and for all. Richard's eyes flickered with triumph. He had won. He had forced her hand. She had agreed to the very thing that would in his mind expose her and ruin her. He gave Alaia a look of cold pity. Judge Vance nodded curtly. Very well. The court orders a medically certified DNA test for Mr. Lopez and the 2 minor children Leo and Chloe Lopez. The samples will be collected by a court-appointed lab. The results will be delivered directly to this court, sealed to be opened at the next hearing. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers said in unison. The trap was now officially set, baited, and sanctioned by the legal system itself. In the days that followed, the court-ordered sample collection took place. A nurse from the appointed lab came to Alaia's house for the children's cheek swabs. Another met Richard at his downtown office. It was all very clinical and sterile. To Richard, it was the final nail in Alaia's coffin. He was so certain of his victory, so wrapped in his narrative of her betrayal, that he never once considered the possibility that he was wrong. His ego wouldn't allow it. Behind the scenes, David's team of forensic accountants finally struck gold. They found the thread. Following the breadcrumbs from a single wire transfer, they unraveled a network of accounts stretching from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland. They found Nightingale Holdings, just as the email had described. They documented over $150 million in marital assets, cash, stocks, property deeds that had been systematically and illegally siphoned off into these accounts in the 6 months before Richard filed for divorce. It was a clear-cut case of criminal fraud. But David found something else, something even more damning. As he dug into the transfers, he noticed a recurring payment, a monthly transfer of $50,000 from one of the offshore accounts to a private trust, the beneficiary of the trust, June Rossi. This wasn't just an affair, it was a financial arrangement. Richard wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was paying his mistress from the very marital funds he was hiding from Alaia. This changes everything, David said, showing Alaia the bank trails. She's not just the other woman, she's a paid co-conspirator. She knew about the hidden assets. She was benefiting from them. She is just as culpable as he is. Alaia looked at the printouts, her expression unreadable. She thought of June's smug look, her crimson dress, her hand on Richard's arm in the courtroom. It wasn't love, it was a business transaction. One more thing, Alaia, David said, his voice low. He slid another document across his desk. It was a background check on June Rossi. Her social media is pristine, very carefully curated, but you can't erase everything. My investigator dug deep. Look at this. He pointed to a cached wedding website from 2 years prior. It was for June Rossi and a man named Dr. Marco Vincente, a respectable cardiologist. The website was full of smiling photos, testimonials about their love, a registry. But the wedding had never happened. It had been called off just a few weeks before the date. He called it off, Alaia asked. No, David said. She did. According to my investigator's source, a jilted bridesmaid, she broke it off very suddenly. Said she'd met someone who could give her the life she deserved. This was about 18 months ago. Right when Frank's PI report suggests the affair with Richard started, Alaia finished connecting the dots. Exactly, David confirmed. She dropped a cardiologist for a billionaire, but it gets better. My investigator found Marco Vincente. He's still heartbroken and he's angry. He said June became obsessed with Richard Lopez after her firm was hired to do some marketing work for Ether Dynamics. He said she talked about him constantly, and he said that just before she broke off the engagement, she told him something she thought was a brilliant plan. David leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. She told her fiancé that her new man was in a dead-end marriage and that they had a plan to get him out. A plan that involved him discovering his wife had cheated on him so he could protect his assets and get custody of the kids. Marco thought she was crazy delusional. He never imagined it was real. Alaia stared at David, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a conspiracy between Richard and his lawyer. June was in on it from the beginning. She wasn't just a passenger. She was in the driver's seat. "Can you get him to testify or sign an affidavit?" Alaia asked, her voice shaking with the magnitude of this revelation. David smiled. "Dr. Vincente is a man of principle, and a man of scorn. He has already signed a sworn affidavit. We have her. We have both of them." They now had a three-pronged attack. The paternity trap, the financial fraud, and the conspiracy confirmed by the mistress's own ex-fiancé. The stage was no longer just set. It was wired with explosives, and Richard and June were about to walk right to the center of it, smiling. The morning of the hearing arrived draped in a thick coastal fog that seemed to muffle the entire city. Alaia chose her armor carefully, the same simple navy blue dress. It was her uniform of quiet resolve. As she drove to the courthouse with David, she felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her for months had been burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. They entered courtroom 4B to a scene of barely controlled chaos. The gallery was packed. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Marcus Thorne was holding court with a few journalists, speaking in low, confidential tones. And then Richard arrived. He walked in as if onto a movie set where he was the star. The smile was back, broader and more self-assured than ever. On his arm again was June Rossi in a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves. They were a vision of power and victory. They took their seats, Richard nodding curtly at his lawyer, completely ignoring Alaia. He didn't even glance in her direction. To him, she was already a ghost, a footnote in his triumphant new life. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Eleanor Vance swept into the room, her black robes flowing behind her. She sat her face in impassive mask and surveyed the room over her spectacles. The ambient noise died instantly. "We are here today to continue the divorce proceedings of Lopez versus Lopez." Judge Vance began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The main order of business is to unseal and announce the results of the court-ordered paternity test. Mr. Thorne, since this was your motion, I assume you are eager to proceed." "We are, Your Honor," Marcus Thorne said, rising to his feet. He shot a look of theatrical sympathy towards his client. "Mr. Lopez is prepared to face the truth, however painful." Alaia could feel Richard's smug energy radiating across the aisle. He leaned forward slightly in his chair like a sprinter in the starting blocks, waiting for the gunshot that would signal his victory. June placed a reassuring hand on his back. Judge Vance picked up a large sealed manila envelope from her desk. The seal of the court-appointed laboratory was visible in crimson wax. With a small, sharp letter opener, she slid it open. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. She slid out a single sheet of paper and unfolded it. She read it to herself first, her eyes scanning the page. For a fleeting second, her expressionless facade seemed to crack. A flicker of something surprise crossed her features before being suppressed. She looked up, her gaze moving from the paper directly to Richard Lopez. "Mr. Lopez," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "The court is in receipt of the official notarized DNA analysis." The entire room held its breath. Richard's smile was frozen on his face. "According to the results," Judge Vance continued, her voice ringing with clarity, "the probability of you, Richard Michael Lopez, being the biological father of the child Leo James Lopez is 99.998%. A collective gasp went through the gallery. Richard's smile didn't just falter, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He stared at the judge as if she'd just started speaking in a foreign language. Judge Vance wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the probability of you, Richard Michael Lopez, being the biological father of the child, Chloe Ann Lopez, is 99.9999%. She laid the paper down flat on her desk. "Let the record show that the paternity of the children is by your own motion, Mr. Lopez, established beyond any scientific doubt. You are their father." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard swiveled his head to look at Marcus Thorne, his eyes wide with panic and fury. Thorne looked just as stunned, his mouth slightly agape. June's hand, which had been on Richard's back, was snatched away as if she'd touched a hot stove. Her face was a canvas of pure shock. This was it, the first detonation. But Alaia and David knew it was just the prelude. Before Thorne could recover and stammer out a response, David Chen stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. Judge Vance turned her piercing gaze to him. "Mr. Chen, given that Mr. Lopez's central claim, a claim he and his counsel have viciously and publicly prosecuted, has now been proven to be a categorical and malicious falsehood, we have several matters to bring to the court's attention." Thorne finally found his voice. "Objection. This is not on the docket." "Overruled." Judge Vance snapped, her eyes narrowing at Thorne. "You opened this door, counsel. You put Ms. Lopez's character and morality on public trial based on a lie. I'm inclined to hear what Mr. Chen has to say. Proceed." David nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. For the past several months, my client has been the subject of a ruthless smear campaign, all based on the lie that was just exposed. But Mr. Lopez's deception runs far deeper than character assassination. He has also engaged in a systematic and illegal campaign to defraud my client of her rightful share of the marital estate." He walked to the clerk and handed over a thick binder. "Your Honor, this is a full forensic accounting report. It details the creation of numerous offshore shell corporations with names like Nightingale Holdings, and documents the illegal transfer of over $150 million of marital assets into these untraceable accounts in the 6 months prior to Mr. Lopez filing for divorce." A wave of shock rolled through the courtroom, 10 times more powerful than the first. Reporters were writing so fast their pens seemed to smoke. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. He was no longer a predator. He was prey caught in the glare of a spotlight, and he was starting to look around for an escape route. "This is an outrage!" Thorne bellowed, but his protest lacked conviction. He looked panicked. "It is indeed an outrage, Mr. Thorne," Judge Vance said coldly, flipping through the first few pages of the binder David had given her. "It appears to be a prima facie case of felony fraud and perjury, given the financial disclosures Mr. Lopez has already submitted to this court." She looked up at Richard again, her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Lopez, you are in a catastrophic amount of legal trouble." But David Chen wasn't done. He held up his hand for silence. "And finally, Your Honor," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "This entire painful charade, the false accusations, the public humiliation of my client, the attempt to disown his own children, was not a spontaneous act of a misguided man. It was a premeditated conspiracy." He turned his body slightly to include not just Richard, but June in his line of sight. "A conspiracy not just between Mr. Lopez and his legal team, but one that actively involved his mistress, Ms. June Rossi." June, who had been shrinking in her seat now, looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "Objection, Your Honor. He's baselessly attacking a civilian in this courtroom," Thorne yelled. "Is it baseless, Mr. Chen?" Judge Vance asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "No, Your Honor," David replied. He produced another document. "This is a sworn and notarized affidavit from a Dr. Marco Vincente." At the mention of the name, all the blood drained from June's face. She looked at Richard, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. But Richard wasn't looking at her. He was staring at David Chen with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Dr. Vincente," David continued, "was Ms. Rossi's fiancé until she abruptly broke off their engagement 18 months ago to begin her affair with the married Mr. Lopez. In his affidavit, Dr. Vincente testifies under penalty of perjury that Ms. Rossi outlined their entire plan to him, a plan where she and Mr. Lopez would manufacture a narrative of wifely infidelity, allowing Mr. Lopez to file for divorce, hide his assets, and contest paternity to gain full custody and leave his wife with nothing. She described it to her fiancé as their perfect plan." David let the words hang in the air. The second and most powerful detonation. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, but it was useless against the tide of shock and outrage. June Rossi snapped. Her carefully constructed facade of sophisticated calm crumbled into dust. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor, and pointed a trembling finger at Richard. You told me it would work," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "You told me she would break. You told me your lawyers had it all handled. You promised me everything." Richard looked at her, his face a mask of utter contempt. "Shut up, you fool," he hissed. But it was too late. Her public outburst was a confession. She had just admitted to the entire conspiracy in open court. Judge Vance slammed her gavel down 3 sharp, deafening cracks. "Silence!" she roared, her voice booming with authority. The room finally fell quiet. She pointed a finger at June. "Ms. Rossi, you will sit down and you will not say another word, or I will have you removed and held in contempt." Then she fixed her glacial stare on Richard Lopez. "Mr. Lopez, your actions in this courtroom and prior to it are the most reprehensible I have seen in my 15 years on this bench. You have committed perjury. You have committed fraud. You have maliciously attempted to defraud your wife and traumatize your own children for financial gain. You have abused the justice system and made a mockery of this court." She leaned forward. "This divorce proceeding is now the least of your problems. I am referring this entire case, the financial fraud, the perjury, the conspiracy, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation." She looked at the court officer. "The evidence binders from Mr. Chen are to be sealed and delivered to the DA by end of day." She looked at Marcus Thorne. "And you, counsel, you are dangerously close to being implicated in this conspiracy. I would advise you to retain your own lawyer." Finally, her gaze softened just for a moment as she looked at Alaia. It was a look of profound respect. Alaia met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She had not said a word. She hadn't needed to. Richard Lopez, the billionaire titan, the master of the universe, sat slumped in his chair, utterly broken. His smile was gone, replaced by the vacant, terrified look of a man whose world had just been utterly and completely obliterated by a truth he had been too arrogant to even consider. The aftermath of the courtroom detonation was swift and brutal. The story wasn't just news. It was a global phenomenon. Billionaire's divorce plot implodes, fraud, perjury, and a fake paternity scandal screamed the headlines. The narrative Richard and Thorne had so carefully constructed was shattered, and the shrapnel tore their reputations to shreds. Richard Lopez was arrested 2 days later. The image of the titan of industry in handcuffs, his face pale and haggard, being led into a police car, became the defining photo of his downfall. The board of Ether Dynamics convened an emergency meeting and summarily fired him as CEO, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable personal conduct. The company's stock plunged over 40%, wiping out billions in value. The God King of Silicon Valley had been dethroned. Marcus Thorne, facing disbarment and a potential indictment as a co-conspirator, immediately cut a deal with the district attorney's office, agreeing to testify against his former client in exchange for immunity. June Rossi vanished. Fired from her job and facing her own legal jeopardy, she became a ghost. Her social media was scrubbed, her apartment emptied. The crimson and cream dresses were replaced by the harsh glare of public infamy. The life she had conspired to steal had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. For Alaia, the victory was quiet, but total. With Richard's assets unfrozen and his fraud laid bare, the divorce settlement was swift and staggering. She was awarded 60% of the marital estate, a sum that amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. She received full legal and physical custody of Leo and Chloe, with Richard's visitation rights to be supervised and contingent on extensive psychological evaluation. She also won ownership of the Atherton mansion. But Alaia didn't want the mansion. It was a gilded cage filled with the ghosts of lies. The first thing she did was put it on the market. 6 months later, the dust had begun to settle. The world had moved on to its next scandal, and the name Richard Lopez was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He was out on bail awaiting a criminal trial that he was almost certain to lose. Alaia and her children were living in a beautiful, light-filled home in Marin County across the Golden Gate Bridge from the city. It was smaller than the Atherton estate, but it felt infinitely larger. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a sprawling garden where Chloe was planting sunflowers, and a music room where Leo was learning to play the guitar. The paparazzi were gone. The whispers had faded. Their lives were blessedly, wonderfully normal. Alaia had rediscovered the woman she was before she became Mrs. Richard Lopez. She had started a small private art consultancy firm advising collectors and authenticating pieces, the very skills she had used to deconstruct her husband's web of lies. She found joy in the work and using her mind and her passion again. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was sitting on her back porch, a cup of tea warming her hands, watching her children play on the lawn. They were laughing, a sound that was pure and unburdened. Leo looked up and caught her eye, giving her a wide, easy smile. It was a genuine smile full of love and security. It was everything Richard's smile had never been. David Chen came to visit, bringing paperwork to sign. They sat on the porch together, a comfortable silence between them. "You know," David said, looking out at the yard, "I've handled hundreds of divorce cases. Most of them end with bitterness and scorched earth. I've never seen one end with this." "With what?" Alaia asked. "With peace," he said. "He set out to destroy you, Alaia. Instead, you found yourself." Alaia considered his words. He was right. In the fire of Richard's betrayal, she had been forged into someone stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely protective of her own happiness than she had ever known she could be. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted, but she had gained herself in a future that was entirely her own. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of salt from the bay and the sound of her children's laughter. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly free. The war was over, and she had won. Not by fighting with his weapons of cruelty and deceit, but with her own intelligence, patience, and the undeniable power of the truth. Alaia's story is a powerful real-life reminder that the truth is the one weapon that never fails. It shows that integrity and strength are not about how loudly you can shout, but how patiently you can plan, and how bravely you can stand in your own conviction, even when the world is against you. Richard Lopez walked into that courtroom believing his money and power made him invincible. He forgot that the most powerful forces on earth, a mother's love, and the simple, elegant truth, cannot be bought, bullied, or beaten. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength comes in many forms and the truth will always come to light. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of deception, survival, and ultimate triumph. What part of Alaia's strategy impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.